Hello, Synchronetizens. What I'm going to be demonstrating for you today is Synchronet and related software running on Google ChromeOS on a Chromebook. This is the version of ChromeOS. It's not the version that it initially booted. It tends to update in the background. It upgraded itself, and I'll talk maybe a little bit more about that. But I thought about rolling back to the original version. I've only had this Chromebook a few days, but thought, I'll just leave it at this. I did do a power wash, so hopefully everything's set up pretty much default and won't be skipping any steps that you might miss. This is the Chromebook I'm using, and I opted for the 256 gig version. It is $30 more, but for double the storage, I figure it was worth it. Let's go through some of the pictures here. Convertible to a sort of tablet style. The keyboard folds back, and then it's got touch screen, so can be usable like a tablet. As a laptop, of course, it's got a touchpad. It does not have a right-click function, but if you use two-finger touch, you get that right-click function. The screen is very bright, very clear, excellent quality. It does have a little bit of more glare than probably I'm used to, but that's typical of touch screens. They seem to be a little more glary. I would say the speakers are not quite as loud as I would like on full volume. I think the speakers could be louder. Not as loud as, say, maybe an iPad on full volume, or even like I have an X1 Lenovo laptop, which is of course a lot more expensive. Everything else about it seems pretty good quality. Now the keyboard has fewer keys. It's not as quite the top quality, but that's typical of Chromebooks. But I've had a few Chromebooks, and this is by far the best quality one I've seen or used. This model has, 8 gigs of RAM, 2 USB-C ports, one on each side, so you can actually charge it from either side as well, which is very nice. Has a USB-A port, has a micro SD card reader slot. It works with external USB microphones right away, like this AT2020 Audio-Technica microphone I'm using. Worked right instantly when I plugged it in. And it's working with external keyboard and mouse, PC keyboard and mouse. Couple notes there on the keyboard. The backspace key always sends the delete character, which is ASCII 127. That's not totally uncommon on like Unix workstations. And the delete key sends Control H, which is your typical backspace character. So those are reversed. The number pad always sends numbers. There's no concept of numlock, or holding shift doesn't send arrow keys. It's always numbers. So that's something I'll have to get used to, because for 40 years or something, I've been using the arrow keys on the numpad, and then of course I use the numbers above the letters for numbers. As you may know, ChromeOS is built on Linux, on the Linux kernel. But that's not really how we're going to be running Synchronet. We need to install the Linux development environment, but just for a little bit of more clarity. So if you type Control-Alt-T, you'll get this Crosh shell, and I think it stands for Chrome shell, Crosh. And you have very few commands. If you just type help, there is an advanced help, and it shows other commands like uname. So now we can tell, this is a Linux kernel, it's 5.4, and the exact processor and the sort of clock rate. It's a quad-core processor. It's got, 2 hyper-threaded cores, so 4 logical cores. And I think the clock speed goes up to 4 gigahertz. I've had no observable fan noise. I don't know how it's cooling, but so far no issues with any fan noise or overheating or anything. It does have top as well in this Crosh environment. And again, I didn't install anything. This is just comes with the ChromeOS. And if you look at all the cores with one, it shows you all the cores. So it does show it's got 4 cores and their current load, which is actually pretty high. Oh, because I'm recording video. That's why. Yeah. Well, it's utilizing all 4 cores. What else can you tell from here? Well, just for fun, you can see all the advanced commands. Now, you can actually enable developer mode and get a full bash prompt. I've done that on other Chromebooks and tried to get Synchronet built and running and really got no success. I haven't attempted with this book yet. I wanted to do the Linux developer mode, which is different from the ChromeOS developer mode. Or they call actually sort of Linux on ChromeOS development environment, which is different than ChromeOS developer mode. Instead, what we're going to do is you go to Settings, and then Advanced, Developers, Linux development environment, turn on. So normally I would recommend that your first user account you create on a Linux install is your personal user account, and then you later create another user account to run the BBS as. I tried that with Linux on ChromeOS, Crostini they call it, and did not have good success, particularly with anything that used graphics. I recommend at this point just creating the run as user, and I would normally call that SBBS for Synchronet BBS. So if you reference the install instructions for Unix, and that includes Linux, you can kind of skip this whole run as user section, because we're just going to go ahead and create the primary user as the run as user, and there's no other user account. Now, normally I'd recommend, I guess, like creating like a second VM for your own personal Linux stuff that you might not want to cross-contaminate with the BBS. Apparently that's in the works. There's a developer channel for ChromeOS, and you can get that capability, but in the sort of mainstream release channel, it's a single VM, and that's what I have on this machine right now, so that's what I'm going to go with. This one user account will have sudo access, there's no password required, so it's a little bit dangerous if you're going to mix modes or users, but we'll go with it. It's not root anyway, and it's not going to corrupt the rest of your ChromeOS install by any way. Alright, so let's go ahead and create that, and the disk size you can change later. If you like, I'll go with the default. And at this point, when I first booted this Chromebook, it got an error at this stage about requiring a ChromeOS update, and I had to restart. I couldn't find any way to force the update. I'll show you the solution to that just in case you do get that same message. But over a short amount of time, ChromeOS updates itself, and then I never could get that error message again. So I think as long as you wait a few hours or something, then reboot maybe, then you'll be good to go. All right, and I think also if you don't have the virtual machine already running, then there's a little bit of a progress bar there the first time, but it does automatically open a terminal and give you, your shell prompt. The host name is Penguin. But just in case this doesn't work for you and you do get that error I referred to, let me show you the solution here. So if you do get the error that you require a ChromeOS update and a restart, then just simply going to this URL in the Chrome browser and changing that setting to disabled. That worked around that problem for me, but like I said, ChromeOS has since self-updated and I don't have that issue anymore, so I can ignore that. Alright, and here we are in what looks like a Unix prompt, and yep, it's Linux. And if we compare this to what we saw earlier with Crush, so Control-T, you can see there are different kernels. So this is the Linux kernel that's running ChromeOS, and this is the Linux kernel that's running in the VM. It's actually newer, and they have slightly different ideas about what the CPU is. But if I look at the CPU info, I might need sudo. No, I don't. Okay. So it knows exactly what kind of CPU it is. And if I go on top and I look at the CPU cores, whoa, it's all 0% right now. Very, very idle. But if I look at it over here in Crush, look at the CPU cores, you can see they're about 40% utilized. So clearly this is the real CPU numbers, and this is the virtual machine, which just has a little sliver of these CPUs. And it's probably kind of high because I'm recording video right now. If we want to know any more details about the release, you normally look in Etsy OS release. And yeah, it's Debian Linux 11, codename Bullseye. So the first thing we want to do is get our prerequisites. You see there's a link here. Probably should be bold. Prerequisites are important. The build's not going to work without it. So if you go to this prerequisites page, you'll see them all listed, required, recommended, some third-party programs that are pretty optional. And then just for your convenience on Debian and Ubuntu Linux, there's this command line that you can just copy and paste into a shell, or you can download this script and run it. Now, if I do download this script, it's a little bit of a pain to get it into the Linux environment. You do that by going to the Mount, ChromeOS folder, and you see there's a fonts folder in there, but if I shared a folder from ChromeOS in there, it would pop up My Files, and then you could have like your downloads or something. So if you use like this ChromeOS Chrome browser to download files, it's not going to be automatically visible in here unless you do this thing where you share the folder. Let me see, I download this, and then it's got a couple versions of it. Let me delete that one. And then it's not going to be visible like I said, but if I go to that folder and I say share with Linux, and now I do that same, looking at that mount point for ChromeOS, now My Files is in there, and downloads folder, and then there's that install file, but it added a 1 to the end because I already had it. Now, it won't execute as is, it needs the execute mode or permission, but I'm not going to bother dealing with that. I'm just going to copy and paste all this. This is, I think, the easier way to do this. Anyway, so now I'm going to install all the packages necessary to build and run Synchronet. And it's asking me to confirm. Yeah, another 450 megabytes, no big deal. Alright, very cool. Everything installed. One thing I should point out is that this user account is a little bit special. Although it has sudo access, it's in the sudo group, it never asks you for the password, and that's because there is no password on this account. SBBS, yeah, just a bang there, so no password. So it's kind of convenient. You won't have to be typing passwords over and again. Alright, so let's get back to those install instructions. So we did the prerequisites. We're going back to the install page, which is under install and then Unix. And skip the run as user because we already have that. That's the only account we're using. Create the Synchronet directory. So this is pretty important. And you could either create it in the root directory, like this, /sbbs, or you can create it in your home directory, and then it's nice to have a symlink to it. So I'm going to go ahead and put it in the home directory. So it's at, the actual path is /home/sbbs/sbbs. It's also convenient to have a symlink to this directory, as some configurations and utilities are just default to look for things in /sbbs. It's not impossible to have it somewhere else, it's just convenient for demonstration purposes anyway. So I'm going to just go into the root directory. There. So SBBS is now a symlink to there. So I can just go into SBBS, and it looks just like that. Alright, building. So it's recommended to build using Git. That's what we're going to do. So I'm just going to copy the link address of this GNU Makefile. We already have wget, so I'll paste that in here. That'll download that bootstrap GNU Makefile. And then we want to copy and paste the correct install command line. This is it, the default to build the current development code. It's going to clone the Git repo from one of 3 locations. And that's going to start building it. The first thing it's going to build is the JavaScript engine from Mozilla. Now it's going to build a whole bunch of js.cpp files. Now it's getting to build cryptlib. That's the cryptographic library that we use for TLS, SSL, and SSH. Alright, now it's starting to build Synchronet. This is the main library for Synchronet, or also known as libsbbs.so. FTP server, mail server, services server, cross-platform development library, console I/O library, a bunch of utilities, user interface library, SBBS Echo, more utilities, web server, JSExec, the Synchronet configuration utility, the user editor, view monitor, domain poker, the beast domain. Yay, created all our symlinks. Cool. So if you look down here on the results, we can compare our results with this, and lo and behold, it's very similar. In fact, I copied and pasted this from this very machine just yesterday. So that looks good. Scroll down a bit more. Skip the tarball section. We used a git method to install, so we didn't get any errors. We're using a release build. So if you look in the exec directory, for example, you see the symlink to SVBS. It points to the exe.release output directory. So that means you're using a non-debug build. There are some graphical utilities I'll demonstrate. All right, first thing you want to do is configure. Setting this environment variable would be a nice thing to do. Let me see. Now, a lot of the utilities will default to look in /svbs/control for the control directory, but some of them don't. So let's go ahead and copy this and export it. Now if I look at that variable, it's pointing in the right place, so now I should just be able to run that command right there, which is the same as doing that because it's relative. Yay, and we get the Synchronet configuration program, and it's running in graphics mode. I could tell this because it popped up another window, and you can make it bigger. Alright, so first thing you probably want to do is, add more nodes if you want them, but 4 is a good start. Of course, set your BBS name, your location, your time zone, your system operator name, that's your name or alias, your system password. These are all things that you definitely want to set it right away. Double check all your other settings, but I wouldn't change too much right at the outset. Just those first 5 settings there, and then also under message options, BBS ID for QWK packets, that's pretty important. You want a unique BBS ID if you're going to be doing any like QWK networking, or you're going to use the Synchronet dynamic DNS service. You want your host name to be unique. Alright, so that works, and if you want to see that same thing running in other screen modes, you could do -IC for curses. And there's also a sort of dumb mode for like very basic standard I/O output and input. All right, so that's the configuration utility. Now we have a couple options with running. Firstly is console mode, and I'll demonstrate that for you. So that's if you just run SVBS, just no options or anything. There are a bunch of command line options available, but we'll just run it with no options and see what happens. Okay, it's doing a bunch of stuff. It's got DevNet pre-configured. We're scrolling back. Look, oh, it bound all our ports. It's listening. So these are all the default ports, standard ports for Telnet, RLogin, SSH, etc. And everything worked correctly, except it didn't create this PID file. That's okay. We don't need it. And if right now we went to another window, let's say, and firstly, we don't have Telnet, so we could SSH, and then just with a local host. You can see it's connected there, and yeah, we trust it, and give it some password, and it's going to say, hey, there's no user called, what's this, some user or whatever, and it's going to say it's going to start the new user creation process, and you have to have the system password to create the first user. That's going to be the sysop by default, so I have to type the default system password, and then you can go through the new user setup. Now, the backspace key sends delete on this keyboard by default on any ChromeOS, I guess even an external keyboard plugged in. So if you want typical backspace, you'd have to hit Control backspace. All right, so we'll just go through the defaults. Sure. Right. Yes. Those are the default user questions. You can always turn them on and off, enable more, disable them. Okay. Our default options, avatars. Doesn't look so great. You probably want to use a BBS terminal to get the best graphics, but it's okay. When I say graphics, ANSI graphics. But it's usable. Anyway, you can see it's working, and other protocols have worked too. You could FTP to it. Oh, you don't have an FTP client, so you probably want to install those things. Those utilities are handy. So sudo apt install FTP telnet. So now we can just telnet to localhost as well, and then you get kind of the normal login screen. You don't have to provide a name and password. FTP should work now too. It does. But as you can see here, all the logging's going to this console here. This console when it's not going to a file. I mean, there are log files, but all this server output isn't going to any kind of file. There's some basic control, but if you really want to tie it into the Linux operating system, you want to use systemd. If you want to set it up as a systemd service. And so it'll automatically start. You'll have integrated control with using standard Linux utilities. You won't have to log in and start it manually. And as far as monitoring and control, using standard systemd methods. So this is really more just like a test interface for like experimenting, so you see if you have issues or errors. So I'll go ahead and shut that down. Now we want to look at the systemd daemon mode. So that's really the whole bucket of all the other options is running daemonized. And the modern Linux method is using systemd. There's a page for setting it up. But the main thing here is there's a link to this file, and this file is included with Synchronet, so you don't have to copy and paste this or anything. It's in the repo install systemd folder. So sbbs.service. So what we want to do is symlink that file into this directory here, lib systemd system. So I'll just change to that directory first, and then do an ls sudo ln-s. I'll just do /sbbs/repo install systemd sbbs.service. And now that file is here, there it is. You can see that it's set up to point to /sbbs control. That's why that symlink is helpful. It's going to enable low port binding here as well. So we have no issues with low ports. It's going to run as SBBS in the SBBS group, and that is the user we are. So now that we've symlinked that file and everything looks okay, we don't need to override any of the settings. If we did, we'd use that command there. Now we can just copy and paste that command. So enable it with sudo. Alright. Now we could either just reboot the Linux machine, it should be running, or we can start it manually with this command. Again, we need sudo. Alright, and is it running? Let's see. We go to another window over here in this directory, and we'll just try that telnet again. There it is. So we don't see any indication of any status or anything, so we can use utilities like system cuddle status SBBS. That kind of tells the general status of it. It's loaded, it's active and running, and this is the most recent log output. But that's kind of brief. If we really want more log output, we would use journal cuddle or journal control, if you prefer. -u SBBS. Now we can scroll around in the log, go right and left. Search for things. You can also like restart it and stuff, but if you wanted to, say, just monitor the status, you could use the watch utility. Start it, you want to status it. There. And so you'll see this change as we log in and stuff. Alright, and there are other like Synchronet specific utilities that you could run for monitoring. There's umonitor. And again, this is running in graphics mode, but you could also run it in curses mode. Let's see, -IC. Yep. And when somebody connects, you'll see the connection, and there's options here. You can launch the configuration program, FidoNet configuration, you've got other options. I didn't build SyncTERM yet, so you can't do that, but I will, just so we can demonstrate it. Okay, let me see, what else do we got? We got some graphical utilities, so like GTK monitor. Normally I want to run those in the background. So this is sort of the equivalent of the Synchronet control panel, but runs in its own process. It's not the same process as the BBS. We've got a graphical user editor. Let me see, we've got the uEdit is a sort of 2E1 user editor. And of course, you log in as a SysOp, you've got an online user editor, semicolon uEdit to do that. Now, getting external access to this, so, internet access to this, using these low ports, the defaults, so the ports below 1024, are not enabled by default, or not routable, I guess, or forwardable in ChromeOS. So, if you go to that Unix development environment port forwarding, and let's say you want to add a port here, we said 23. Oh, we get a warning. Port number must be between 1024 and 65535. So it's not going to let us use one of the well-known or standard port numbers, so we'll just change it to 2023. Give it a name. And then on our external gateway to the internet, our access point or router or whatever, we would tell it to, route that incoming port, either 2023 or 23 or any other port number you like, to this local IP address and port 2023, because you can do that port remapping as long as you're doing the address with remapping as well. If you want to know, well, what is the IP address of this machine? In this case, I'm connected over Ethernet, but it works as well over Wi-Fi. There you go. There's your local IP address. So I would just set my router to, I want to use a standard port 23, for example, for Telnet. I would set a public interface port 23 to route to this, or translate really is what it's doing, or forwarding to this private IP address 192.168.1.150 and port 2023. And then I would have public access to that port. And I'll go ahead and demonstrate that for you. So we want to, well, first of all, let me go ahead and set up that monitoring thing, because that's kind of nice. And then when I edit the startup file, this sbbs.ini, and let me look for 23, and I'll just change that to 2023 for the Telnet port, and I save the changes. It should automatically recycle over here, and it is. It's recycling the server. And then I'm just going to SSH to another system. Happens to also be on the same private network, but it's a good just example of how that port forwarding works. And then I will telnet to 192.168.1.150 2023. And there you go. I'm connected to that Bullseye Debian 11 system, which is running underneath ChromeOS. And that is not this machine. This is running, what is it? SID. Right? Yeah, bookworm. SyncTERM, let's demonstrate that real quick. That's kind of fun. Repo, source, SyncTERM. Let's build SyncTERM. It doesn't build when you build Synchronet by default. Alright, and then I think it has an install target, in fact, doesn't it? You gotta. Okay, SyncTERM runs and it's running in X11 graphics mode. Not sure why it's not in SDL mode by default, but let's give this a shot. Say telnet, localhost. Yep, because it defaults to port 23, so I need to edit that. Okay, so I had to use the special search button combined with the right arrow button. The function keys are a little weird on ChromeOS. The other option is Control-E. That also works. Okay, so we'll change the port to 2023. And then, there we go. SyncTERM. There we are in cursus mode. Lastly, there's a set of instructions on updating if you wanted to update later. Commands that you would issue to do that, and if you had any local customizations, how to retain those. And definitely this does not overwrite your configuration in any way. There you have it, Synchronet on ChromeOS, for the first time that I've seen anyway.
Synchronet.
Synchronet. Synchronet. Synchronet.
Synchronet. Synchronet. Synchronet. Synchronet.
Synchronet. Synchronet. Synchronet.
Synchronet.
Synchronet.
Synchronet.
Synchronet. Synchronet.
Synchronet. Synchronet.
Synchronet.
Synchronet.
Synchronet.
Synchronet. Synchronet. Synchronet.
Synchronet. Synchronet.
Synchronet.
Synchronet. Synchronet. Synchronet. Synchronet.
Synchronet, 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 Synchronet's big. Synchronet.
Synchronet, Synchronet, the BBS program that I use.
Synchronet. Synchronet.
Synchronet. Synchronet. Synchronet.
Synchronet BBS software.
Synchronet.
Synchronet, Synchronet, and Synchronet.